Treaty with the Osage, September 29, 1865, ratified June 26, 1866. Articles of a treaty and convention made and concluded at Canville Trading Post, Osage Nation, within the boundary of the state of Kansas, on the 29th day of September, 1865, by and between Dan Cooley, Commissioner of Indian Affairs, and Elijah Sells, Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Southern Superintendency Commissioners on the part of the U.S. and the chiefs of the tribe of Great and Little Osage Indians, the said chiefs being duly authorized to negotiate and treat by said tribes. Article 1. The tribe of the Great and Little Osage Indians, having now more lands than are necessary for their occupation, and all payments from the government to them under former treaties having ceased, leaving them greatly impoverished, and being desirous of improving their conditions by disposing of their surplus lands, do hereby grant and sell to the U.S. the lands contained within the following boundaries, that is to say, beginning at the southeast corner of their present reservation and running thence north with the eastern boundary thereof 50 miles to the northeast corner, thence west with the northern line 30 miles, thence south 50 miles to the southern boundary of said reservation, and thence east with said southern boundary to the place of beginning, provided that the western boundary of said land herein ceded shall not extend further westward than upon a line commencing at a point on the southern boundary of said Osage country 1 mile east of the place where the Verdigris River crosses the southern boundary of the state of Kansas. And in consideration of the grant and sale to them of the above described lands, the U.S. agreed to pay the sum of $300,000, which sum shall be placed to the credit of said tribe of Indians in the treasury of the U.S., and interest thereon, at the rate of 5% per annum, shall be paid to said tribe semi-annually in money, clothing, provisions, or such articles of utility as the Secretary of Interior may from time to time direct. Said land shall be surveyed and sold under the direction of the Secretary of Interior on the most advantageous terms for cash, as public lands are surveyed and sold under existing laws, including any act granting lands to the state of Kansas in aid of the construction of a railroad through said lands, but no preemption claim or homestead settlement shall be recognized. And after reimbursing the U.S. the cost of said survey and sale, and the said sum of $300,000 placed to the credit of said Indians, the remaining proceeds of sale shall be placed in the treasury of the U.S. to the credit of the Civilization Fund, to be used under the direction of the Secretary of Interior for the education and civilization of Indian tribes residing within the limits of the U.S. Article 2. The said tribe of Indians also hereby cede to the U.S. a tract of land 20 miles in width from north to south off the north side of the remainder of their present reservation, and extending its entire length from east to west, which land is to be held in trust for said Indians and to be surveyed and sold for their benefit under the direction of the Commissioner of the General Land Office at a price not less than $1.25 per acre, as other lands are surveyed and sold under such rules and regulations as the Secretary of Interior shall from time to time prescribe. The proceeds of such sales, as they accrue, after deducting all expenses incident to the proper execution of the trust, shall be placed in the treasury of the U.S. to the credit of said tribe of Indians, and the interest thereon, at the rate of 5% per annum, shall be expended annually for building houses, purchasing agricultural implements and stock animals, and for the employment of a physician and mechanics, and for providing such other necessary aid as will enable said Indians to commence agricultural pursuits under favorable circumstances, provided that 25% of the net proceeds arising from the sale of said trust lands until said percentage shall amount to the sum of $80,000 shall be placed to the credit of the school fund of said Indians, and the interest thereon at the rate of 5% per annum shall be expended semi-annually for the boarding, clothing, and education of the children of said tribe. Article 3. The Osage Indians, being sensible of the great benefits they have received from the Catholic mission situate in that portion of the reservation herein granted and sold to the U.S., do hereby stipulate that one section of said land, to be selected by the Commissioner of Indian Affairs so as to include the improvements of said mission, shall be granted in fee simple to John Schoenmaker in trust for the use and benefit of the society sustaining said mission, with the privilege to said Schoenmaker, on the payment of $1.25 per acre, of selecting and purchasing 2 sections of land adjoining the section above granted, the said selection to be held in trust for said society, and to be selected in legal subdivisions of surveys and subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior. Article 4. All loyal persons, being heads of families and citizens of the U.S. or members of any tribe at peace with the U.S. having made settlements and improvements as provided by the preemption law of the U.S. and now residing on the lands provided to be sold by the U.S. in trust for said tribe, as well as upon the said lands herein granted and sold to the U.S., shall have the privilege at any time, within 1 year after the ratification of this treaty, of buying a quarter section each at $1.25 per acre, such quarter section to be selected according to the legal subdivisions of surveys, and to include, as far as practicable, the improvements of the settler. Article 5. The Osages, being desirous of paying their just debts to James N. Coffey and A. B. Campbell for advances in provisions, clothing, and other necessaries of life, hereby agree that the Superintendent of Indian Affairs for the Southern Superintendency and the agent of the tribe shall examine all claims against said tribe and submit the same to the tribe for approval or disapproval, and report the same to the Secretary of Interior with the proofs in each case for his concurrence or rejection, and the Secretary may issue to the claimants scrip for the claims thus allowed, which shall be receivable as cash in payment for any of the land sold in trust for said tribe, provided the aggregate amount thus allowed by the Secretary of Interior shall not exceed $5,000. Article 6. In consideration of the long and faithful services rendered by Charles Maugrain, one of the principal chiefs of the Great Osages, to the people, and in consideration of improvements made and owned by him on the land by this treaty sold to the U.S., and in lieu of the provisions made in Article 14 for the half-breed Indians, the heirs of said Charles Maugrain, deceased, may select one section of land, including his improvements from the north half of said land, subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior. Upon his approval of such selection, it shall be patented to the heirs of the said Maugrain, deceased, in fee simple. Article 7. It is agreed between the parties hereto that the sum of $500 shall be set apart each year from the moneys of said tribe and paid by the agents to the chiefs. Article 8. The Osage Indians, being anxious that a school should be established in their new home at their request, it is agreed and provided that John Shoemaker may select one section of land within their diminished reservation, and upon the approval of such selection by the Secretary of Interior, such section of land shall be set apart to the shoemaker and his successors, upon condition that the same shall be used, improved, and occupied for the support and education of the children of said Indians during the occupancy of said reservation by the said tribe, provided that said land shall not be patented, and upon the discontinuance of said school shall revert to said tribe and to the U.S. as other Indian schools. Article 9. It is further agreed that, in consideration of the services of Darius Rogers to the Osage Indians, a patent shall be issued to him for 160 acres of land, to include his mill and improvements, on paying $1.25 per acre. And said Rogers shall also have the privilege of purchasing at the rate of $1.25 per acre one quarter section of land adjoining the tract above mentioned, which shall be patented to him in like manner, said lands to be selected subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior. Article 10. The Osages acknowledge their dependence on the government of the U.S. and invoke its protection and care. They desire peace and promise to abstain from war and commit no depredations on either citizens or Indians, and they further agree to use their best efforts to suppress the introduction and use of ardent spirits in their country. Article 11. It is agreed that all roads and highways laid out by the state or general government shall have right-of-way through the remaining lands of said Indians on the same terms as are provided by law when made through lands of citizens of the U.S. and railroad companies. When the lines of their roads necessarily pass through the lands of said Indians shall have the right-of-way upon the payment of fair compensation therefor. Article 12. Within 6 months after the ratification of this treaty, the Osage Indians shall remove from the land sold and ceded in trust and settle upon their diminished reservation. Article 13. The Osage Indians, having no annuities from which it is possible for them to pay any of the expenses of carrying this treaty into effect, it is agreed that the U.S. shall appropriate $20,000 or so much thereof as may be necessary for the purpose of defraying the expense of survey and sale of the lands hereby ceded in trust, which amount so expended shall be reimbursed to the Treasury of the U.S. from the proceeds of the first sale of lands. Article 14. The half-breeds of the Osage tribe of Indians, not to exceed 25 in number, who have improvements on the north half of the land sold to the U.S., shall have a patent issued to them in fee simple for 80 acres each, to include, as far as practicable, their improvements, said half-breeds to be designated by the chiefs and headmen of the tribe, and the heirs of Joseph Swiss, a half-breed and a former interpreter of said tribe, shall, in lieu of the above provisions, receive a title in fee simple to a half section of land, including his house and improvements, if practicable, and also to a half section of trust lands, all of said lands to be selected by the party subject to the approval of the Secretary of Interior. Article 15. It is also agreed by the U.S. that said Osage Indians may unite with any tribe of Indians at peace with the U.S., residing in said Indian territory, and thence afterwards receive an equitable proportion according to their numbers of all moneys, annuities, or property payable by the U.S. to said Indian tribe, with the agreement may be made, and in turn granting to said Indians, in proportion to their numbers, an equitable portion of all moneys, annuities, and property payable by the U.S. to said Osages. Article 16. It is also agreed by said contracting parties that if said Indians should agree to remove from the state of Kansas and settle on lands to be provided for them by the U.S. in the Indian Territory, on such terms as may be agreed on between the U.S. and Indian tribes now residing in said territory or any of them, then the diminished reservations shall be disposed of by the U.S. in the same manner and for the same purposes as hereinbefore provided in relation to said trust lands, except that 50% of the proceeds of the sale of said diminished reserve may be used by the U.S. in the purchase of lands for a suitable home for said Indians in said Indian Territory. Article 17. Should the Senate reject or amend any of the above articles, such rejection or amendment shall not affect the other provisions of this treaty, but the same shall go into effect when ratified by the Senate and approved by the President. D.N. Cooley, Commissioner of Indian Affairs. Elijah Sells, Superintendent Indian Affairs, Southern Superintendency, and Commissioner. May So Shinka, Little Bear, His X Mark, Chief Little Osages. Noput Walla, His X Mark, Second Chief to Little Bear. Pathahunka, His X Mark, Little Chief LB Band. Whitehair, His X Mark, Principal Chief Osage Nation. Tawa Shehe, His X Mark, Chief Big Hill Band. Beaver, His X Mark, Second Chief Whitehairs Band. Claremont, His X Mark, Chief Claremont Band. Opuntonko, His X Mark. Washapeshe, His X Mark, Little Chief WH Band. Witnesses: Mashahunka, Counselor, Little Bear Band, His X Mark. Washapawatanaka, His X Mark. Waduhaka, His X Mark. Shinkawatatnika, His X Mark. Shawaita, His X Mark. Greymaw, His X Mark. Haluwashosha, His X Mark. Natatankawaki, His X Mark. Nampawaku, His X Mark. Hashka Mani, His X Mark. Attest G.C. Snow, U.S. Neosho, Indian Agent. Milton W. Reynolds, Acting Clerk. Theodore C. Wilson, Phonographic Reporter. Alexander Bea, Interpreter, Osage Nation. Witnesses: Little Bear's Band. Kawahosa, His X Mark. Okepahola, His X Mark. Mehatha, His X Mark. Whitehair's Band of Witnesses. Shinkawasha, Counselor of Whitehair's X Mark. Washawa, His X Mark. Kahekatsache, His X Mark. Kahekawashinpeshi, His X Mark. Sapekala, His X Mark. Watsa Shimka, His X Mark. Watnopashi, His X Mark. Shinbikashi, His X Mark. Nekule Bulo, His X Mark. Okay Ba Ka Lo, His X Mark. Kinuanke, His X Mark. Pasumono, His X Mark. We, the undersigned chiefs and headmen of the Claremont and Black Dog Band and the Great Osage Nation in council at Fort Smith, Arkansas, have had the foregoing treaty read and explained in full by our interpreter, L.P. Chateau, and fully approved by the provisions of said treaty made by our brothers, the Osages, and by this signing make it our act and deed. Claremont Chief of Claremont Band, His X Mark. Pally, Second Chief of Claremont Band, His X Mark. Hati Inga, Dryfeather, Counselor, His X Mark. Kaha Chelatan, Brave, His X Mark. Dotakashi, Brave, His X Mark. Black Dog, Chief, Black Dog Band, His X Mark. William Penn, Second Chief, Black Dog Band, His X Mark. Brookarm, Counselor, His X Mark. Nekake Panna, Brave, His X Mark. Nekagahi, Brave, His X Mark. Witnesses: Wahaskan Mani, His X Mark. Wakan Chela, His X Mark. Washa Sha Watenga, His X Mark. Pachahanga, His X Mark. Longbow, His X Mark. Washewala, His X Mark. War Eagle, His X Mark. Pahangli Gatan, His X Mark. Sundown, His X Mark. Tawangihai, His X Mark. Wahacho no Shi, His X Mark.